Well, I think this is, as you're saying, this is a conference that's really well balanced, and I think the panels and the keynotes were particularly insightful, and which is not really, it's not easy.
Mm-hmm.
There's always the risk of being quite superficial. I think the conference is addressing relevant topics for founders and also for investors. So I think that's a very important aspect.
Hello, Pedro. Welcome to the conference. Could you present yourself and present your company?
Definitely. So I'm Pedro Cristal Branco. I'm an investor at Armilar.
Okay.
Armilar is a VC firm based in Lisbon. We've been around for the past 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
We're focused on B2B software opportunities, sector agnostic, and we have a preference for companies with strong technological differentiation.
Okay.
We invest in early stage. We manage seed and Series A funds.
Okay. I heard there's some big news recently. Yeah. Maybe talk about what's going on in your firm.
That's true. So we've just raised our fourth flagship Series A fund.
Okay.
So the first closing was at 120 million.
Okay.
Have a target of up to 250. And the goal is to invest, to back exceptional teams in Europe in their late seed to Series B investment rounds.
Okay, so you're here at the HealthTech Investor Summit. Something that's very particular to this conference is the reverse pitches. Did you have the chance to showcase your company and maybe try and attract some startups?
Definitely, I think that's an important part of the conference, and I think it really helps that the ratio of startups to investors is so well balanced. So, in the sense that startups have an opportunity to identify relevant investors that could maybe partner with them, and at the same time investors can develop relationships with other investors and also with companies developing breakthrough technologies in their fields. So.
Yeah. So maybe for those who didn't see your reverse pitch, what are you specifically looking for right now?
So we're sector agnostic, as I said. So we cover many industries. Mm-hmm. Actually, our track record is mostly on IT.
Yep.
So within the health tech space, we typically look more into companies in the digital health subsector. Mm-hmm. Mostly B2B digital health. So companies that are improving healthcare, pharma, biotech workflows.
Okay.
Much more than actually, therapeutics or diagnostics companies.
Yeah, so you said you're from Portugal. Is your firm also based in Portugal?
Yes, I'm based in Lisbon, so most of the team is based in Lisbon. We have two colleagues based in Spain.
That's very interesting. I've met a lot of people who are from the Benelux area or France or countries on the side, but Portugal is kind of not something that you hear every day. Maybe talk about this ecosystem of this of you coming from Portugal and coming into this side of Europe.
Well, yes, the ecosystem. I think we're in a good phase. So when Armilar started in the year 2000, there was no ecosystem in Portugal, and actually, so even in Europe, it's still in its early days.
Yep.
So in our initial funds, we made a lot of investments in the United States. So we understood what's the type of VC culture that exists there. And then, of course, as things started getting more mature around here, we started investing closer to home. Okay. So have many investments, especially in seed stages. We invest a lot in Portugal, so say that 50 to 70% of our seed investments are in Portugal. But then in Series A, we look broader. So Iberia still has a very important role. So Portugal and Spain, and we believe that we can be relevant players there. But we look into whole Europe, especially Western Europe.
Yeah, of course. So we talked about the speciality of this conference, which is having 50% investors and 50% companies. We try a lot of the time to give advice to founders to get money, but what is your advice? What would be your advice to investors?
Wow, that's. I think a good advice to investors is to start developing relationships with founders early on. I think not only when we're looking to invest, but start to understand what who are those founders, what have they done in the past, what's exactly their technology, understand the markets that they play in. So it's, for me, I think it's a long term. So as we typically say at Armilar, so an investment relationship, a relationship between an investor and the founder, it's typically longer than the average marriage. So we should take time to date, to get to know each other, and then if we're sufficiently convinced that this is there's a good partnership potential, then we can go for an investment.
Yeah. The long-term partnerships is also as important because we're dealing with healthcare and it usually takes a lot of time. Maybe something that I've noticed is that a lot of investors, yes, do create relationships with founders very early on, but what about the relationships between investors?
That's completely essential. So I think one of the beautiful things about the VC world is that it's a very collaborative industry, in the sense that we're investing in risky businesses. So it's very unusual to invest alone. So there are typically investors that invested in earlier rounds. Well, usually you co-invest with one or two investors in each round, and then you'll have also others that can come later on. So I think developing trust relationships, understanding what are the key areas where each investor can add value to a certain company, and then trying to build a consortium of partners that are interested in have the interests aligned and are interested in the success of the company.
Okay, great. Maybe for a last question, what would be a message that you would give to the viewers of Tech Europe and also HealthTech Investor Summit regarding either investments or either the conference and why it's important to come here if you want to grow?
Well, I think this is, as we're saying, this is a conference that's really well balanced, and I think the panels and the keynotes were particularly insightful, and which is not really, it's not easy. There's always the risk of being quite superficial. I think the conference is addressing relevant topics for founders and also for investors. So I think that's a very important aspect. I can give you a few examples. So there was a session on how should you set up a board, and how should boards operate, what are the best practices in board operations, or what are the different, so especially in health tech, business models can be particularly challenging. So we also saw a few sessions on that. So I think that the conference is very well set up, and there's of course room to play an important role in Europe. So there are many conferences in Europe, but I think this one can be one of the most relevant ones for sure in this area. And then, health is a tough market with many challenges. But I think European entrepreneurs are showing the right level of bravery to face those challenges and to become winners.
Yeah, it's nice to see the balance, but it's also very interesting to see and to look through success stories that come by this conference, and it was very interesting to interview you.
Thank you.
And I hope you had a very wonderful time at HealthTech Investor Summit.
It was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.